Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Hazem Seeker. It's a week that began with a new attempt at diplomacy and ended with multiple explosions in the Syrian capital. On Sunday, the UN and Arab League envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, called for talks between the Syrian government and the opposition. Brahimi welcomed Syrian opposition leader Moaz al-Khatib's offer to meet senior members of the government not involved in the violence. He said that these talks could open the door to a peaceful solution. On Wednesday, Russia and the Arab League agreed to work together to try to bring Syria's government and the opposition to the negotiating table. They were the first direct talks on Syria between Russia and the Arab League. But the violence on the ground has continued unabated. On Thursday and Friday, multiple explosions took place in the Syrian capital, Damascus. One of them targeted the Ba'ath Party headquarters near the Russian embassy. The Syrian government blamed groups linked to al-Qaeda. The opposition denies any involvement in the attacks. But our main focus in this week's programme is the role of women in the conflict, often invisible in the political and media discussion over the last 2 years. Yet they are half of Syria's population, mothers, wives and daughters, and now increasingly weapons of war. Although Syrian women have always been able to join the armed forces, recently there's been an influx of women joining the National Defence Force, which is similar to a reserve army. Several reports say President Bashar al-Assad has recruited more women to guard checkpoints in an attempt to make up for defections and casualties in his declining army. The reports say up to 500 women have been drafted into the new paramilitary force known as the Lionesses for National Defence. They form part of the recently formed 10,000-strong National Defence Force, an important part of Assad's counter-insurgent strategy, as the president desperately tries to regain control of the country's towns and cities. Part of their role is to carry out security checks on veiled women. As with previous wars, the weapon of sexual violence has also been prevalent in Syria. A report by the International Rescue Committee at the start of the year said rape is a significant and disturbing, in their words, feature of this war. The agency said women and girls cited sexual violence as their main reason for fleeing from Syria. The report also documented women and girls being attacked in public and in their homes, primarily by armed men. Well, to discuss these issues now, we're joined by our three guests. In Montreal, Afra Jabali, a member of the Syrian National Coalition. In San Francisco, Aida Talati, a Syrian-American activist and author. And in Sydney, Hanadi Assoud, a member of Hands Off Syria, a group of Syrians who support the government and are against any foreign intervention in Syria. Good to have you all with us. Afra Jalabi, if I could start with you, shouldn't we be looking at rape increasingly as a weapon of war rather than as a consequence of it?
Well, yeah, rape and sexual violence, unfortunately, are used during times of conflict as a weapon against women. And this regime has been targeting children and targeting women because it wants to send a message to the Syrians that we will stop short of nothing to humiliate you and to stop you. And I think rape in this case is a strong message to a society that is fairly conservative and cares about women's issues and in ways that are perhaps for a society that is so traditional like as the Syrian society, rape has a double message as well. It's about honor, it's about violating women, and it's about violating a whole country.
So what can we do to fight it then?
Well, this regime has to stop. It's a crazy regime. It is shelling residential areas. It is killing citizens. It is killing children, targeting children. I was recently in the liberated areas, and I saw for myself that this regime actually targets children. I slept in a room that has bullet marks because they were trying, when the snipers were previously there, they were trying to target the small kids of the family where we stayed. And so, and recently, as we all know, they have been firing Scud missiles over Aleppo into residential areas indiscriminately. And so the world is watching a regime that has hijacked an entire nation and it's killing its own citizens.
Aida Dalati, there is this cultural taboo, isn't there, particularly in a place like Syria, when it comes to the issue of rape and the shame that it brings on women and their families. And some of these stories, these are just the ones that we know about. And for that reason, there may be lots more than this going on that we don't know about.
Yes, of course. There's a lot going on, and it's systematic rape. You know, and if you survive that, then you get shot, and then if you survive that, you lose a limb. It's a traumatic evolvement of events, and I don't understand what's going on with women across the world, and specifically even in the United States. I mean, this is not acceptable. This is rape on the way to genocide.
Hanadi, Assoud, some of these stories from women are difficult to verify, but they do make for some pretty horrifying reading. But the accounts also say that many of these attacks on women are being carried out by soldiers in the Syrian army or Shabiha militiamen aligned with the regime.
Right, you just said it. Nobody could verify that. Even UN could not verify the atrocities caused by, we don't even know by whom. About what the other speakers were saying about what the government's doing to women. Syria's got a very great history. It's always been known as a Syrian culture that is open-minded to women. We have almost equal rights there. Women now, if you want to know what the concerns of women in Syria, they're very worried with all the minorities about these fundamentalists taking over, and worried about what damage they could do to the status of women.
But there are so, I mean, I know you said, and I acknowledged it, that these stories are difficult to verify, but there are so many of them. There are hundreds of these stories. So when you talk about the sheer numbers here, I mean, why do you continue to question them?
I mean, Syria has never had this happen before. Why now? We are aware that there's a lot of fundamentalists in Syria. We are aware that there are a lot of jihadists. Why not them? Why the government? Why would the government do that to its own people? The government's been there for so long. It's a legitimate government. It's been elected by its people. Why would the government kill its own people? It's a question every Syrian will ask.
I don't know where you get your ideas.
Yes, it is. I know that because the people of Syria, they elected the president. How do you know that?
We elected
a president. Know otherwise?
Are you out of your mind? He inherited it. They changed the entire constitution to fit in the new president. And we welcomed it because we thought, well, he's young. We wanted to avoid all the problems in the region and Iraq, etc. And now you're telling me that we need to verify rape? You are from Australia. How dare you tell people to verify their rape?
So are you telling me that you are with these fundamentalists? Are you supporting their move? Are you telling me that your status as a woman will be the same if they take over? Can you tell me why you support them? Can you tell me why you support people that are from overseas,
First of all,
jihadists? Do you know where you will be if they take over?
I know you.
All right,
listen.
Yeah, briefly, Ada, if you just want to respond to that, and then I'll bring in Afra.
Yes, you know, if you want to boil this down to just two parties, jihadist or non-jihadist, I think you are driving a very weak conversation. I have watched your tapes. You don't even believe international media. You think that journalists who are dying by the dozens in Syria are also in cahoots against the government. I mean, I give you some credibility. I understand you think that this is going the wrong way. Everybody does, but it has gone to way over the top, and I'm really ashamed of the American administration, all the way down to the Syrian administration, for not putting some brakes on this.
Afra Jalabi, I know you want to chime in here.
Yes, the question of legitimacy. This regime is not legitimate. We all know that. And I think we're laughing at ourselves and the rest of the world if we say that this regime is legitimate and elected. We know that Hafiz al-Assad came to power through a military coup d'etat, and he even got rid of the friends who helped him. And he held a security state. And people, if they accepted the situation, most of the people, it was because it was a reign of terror. And there has been hundreds of people and thousands of people who paid their lives. In 1982, close to 40,000 people died in a 27-day campaign in Hama. And the world kept rehabilitating these terrorists back into the international community. In fact, if there are terrorists, it is this regime that has been bent on killing and terrorizing its population. And I'm sorry, women have not been doing well. The Syrian regime has allowed honor killings and sometimes even rewarded men who have been marginalizing women over the last 40 years. A macho state, a state that is run by security and the military, is no feminist state, is not an egalitarian state, and we know. They have some spokeswomen who are like some sort of an ugly makeup, like Buthaina Shaban, over a monstrous terrorist regime that has really terrorized its population. And now that there has been a revolution which has demanded legitimate rights, human rights, and the unity of Syria, nobody responded equally to the real demands and the legitimate demands of the people. And what happened is that eventually some jihadists came into the country, just the way it happened in Bosnia. When the world left Bosnia alone, jihadists came to do something, because you have always idealists like the Che Guevara movement. They were communists, but they went everywhere to help people. Of course there will be idealist people, they might have wrong ideas, but when you are silent about the rape of women, it shames me. It shames me to hear a Syrian woman who is an accomplice to these crimes. I am so sad to hear you defend a brutal, sexist, misogynist regime against your own female fellows in your own country.
All right, let's move on to the issue, the stories of recruitment of women in the Syrian army, those stories that have emerged this week. And I want to put this back to you, Hanadi, Assoud. Your opponents of Assad's regime will say that this is an act of desperation. What do you think is behind this?
You mean women joining the force, the army force?
Well, they're saying that basically that they're running out of men, so they have to bring in women now.
Not because they're running out of men. Women have to defend themselves first. I mean, there have been a lot of rapes. It's been recorded there's been a lot of rapes. The woman needs to defend herself. She needs to defend her family. She needs to defend her community. There's nothing wrong with a woman being armed. She's not only being armed to fight, she's been put on some checkpoints to check some veiled women, because we are aware that there's a lot of suicide bombers, and they do cover themselves, whether they're men or women, in veil. So that's a role she was given. She's being given roles to protect some communities. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not that she wanted to do it. She's in a position, the environment there, there's no choice but to join the men and help to bring in, stabilize the country. We have terrorists in the country. We need to get rid of them.
Afra Jalabi, what do you make of the fact that more women, it seems, are now being recruited into the Syrian army?
The pro-regime people are sounding more and more like the Zionists in the region. I mean, they always, Israel tried to use female fighters in order to present itself as this kind of egalitarian country in a sea of backward people. And they used the word terrorists for Palestinians who are demanding legitimate rights. And this is what we're hearing from pro-regime people. And they're using these propaganda tactics because, the world is focusing on these elements of the jihadists and the rise of kind of a fundamentalist discourse as a reaction to the crimes of the regime. So it is really a propaganda tactic. If the Syrian regime was really interested in women's rights, it would have done it for the last 40 years, not now in its fight against so-called terrorism.
Haida Delati.
When it's the Syrian people are trying to free themselves.
Well, as I said, I think on Huffington Post, I posted a comment. When I saw the Shabiha women, Lijan Shabiha, they call them, and they're standing there and, in the nice, crisp, beautiful fatigues and shiny shoes. I mean, what a contrast to the poor Syrian women who are having babies, premature babies, in little camps in Zaatari camp in Jordan, and starving to death. All for women in the army, of course. As a 17-year-old in Damascus and as a Damascene, I was absolutely not welcome. And I've seen the likes of this, but I think, time will tell. But the idea that they're running out of men, and this is why they put the women, I think this is sort of a Qaddafi deja vu moment.
Do you think it's being used as a propaganda tactic?
Oh my God, I'm telling you, we have seen nothing. Lord knows what's going to come next.
Let's talk now about one of the other stories making the news this week. Syria's opposition coalition saying it is making a stand against what it called the international silence over continuing atrocities. It turned down invitations from Russia and the US to discuss the conflict. Jamal Shayal has more.
Missiles land during the night on a residential area in Syria's second city, Aleppo. Dozens of people are killed and many more injured. It is because of attacks like these that Syria's main opposition group has now decided to pull out of crucial international talks. A statement issued by the Syrian National Coalition read,
"The international silence on the crimes committed every day against our people amounts to participating in 2 years of killings. In protests against this shameful international position, the coalition leadership has decided to suspend its participation in the Rome meeting of the Friends of Syria and decline the invitations to visit Russia and the United States."
From the start of the uprising, the international community has criticized Syria's opposition for its failure to unite, citing that as one of the main reasons why it couldn't provide it with more support. But now it seems the Syrian National Coalition, which has been meeting in Cairo, has put the ball firmly in the court of the international community. It says its members have reached an agreement on forming a government to run rebel-held areas.
The leaders of the Syrian National Coalition have agreed to form a transitional government to operate within rebel-held areas. It's been decided that the head of this government will be announced by March the 2nd, after an agreement's been reached with all opposition groups.
Agreeing to form a government will certainly strengthen the opposition's position. But unfortunately for those living under the non-stop bombardment, it doesn't weaken that of President Bashar al-Assad. And as the diplomatic struggle to find a solution to this bloody war continues, so does the death and destruction. For those inside Syria, that's been their daily reality for almost 2 years.
Jamal Al-Shayal for Inside Syria.
Afra Jalabi, let's turn back to you. Can I assume, first of all, that you support your organisation's position on turning back from these talks?
Well, I think it's always good to be engaged, but at the same time, I do understand the profound levels of frustrations that the Syrian people
So what do you think it's going to do then? Is it the right move?
There has been... I think it's a symbolic stance this time. There has been several meetings, and all that we get is more rhetoric than actual support and help. There are liberated areas in Syria that need protection and aerial protection because they're being shelled, and the international community has not done that. The Syrian people have been trying to liberate themselves with the very little they have. It is their resilience, their unity, and their will that has been achieving the victory that they have been achieving. But that also requires international support, because the Syrian regime is supported by Iran, by Hezbollah, by Russia, and by the Chinese, and they use their veto right to block any UN resolution. And on top of that, they are sending, especially a country like Iran, they're sending money and weaponry to help the Syrian regime crush its own people. So there is international intervention in Syria. It is on the side of regime, but there's not international intervention on the side of the people. Unfortunately, international politics is not run on human rights. It's run on regional interest and economic interest. And this is why the Syrian situation is actually a symbolic shame to the international community and the way it organizes its house. There's a true need for change, and that's why I keep drawing parallels with Bosnia. I mean, there was intervention in Libya, there were intervention in Kuwait. These countries have oil, but Bosnia, it took them over 4 years to do anything until the numbers shamed them. And this is what's happening in Syria. The numbers are staggering, and they're shaming all of us. I mean, we are all silent, and we're watching the bleeding of Syrians every day. At least 200 people die every day, mostly civilians, women and children, from residential areas that are being shelled by Scuds, by jet fighters. And I was there. I mean, it's even when there's safety on the ground and there are no Shabiha and no security thugs, but the sky is not safe. And so the world is watching that. So it is a symbolic stance to tell the world enough is enough.
All right. Hanadi Assoud, regardless of what your view may be on the Syrian National Council, without their participation, what chance is there of bringing an end to the violence?
Well, there has been dialogue. I mean, there has been talks. I do know that there they sat on a table, but as far as what we know, I mean, what I've read is that they get their orders from America, they get their orders from France. I don't think these people, FSA with that flag, that mandate French flag, they know what's right for Syria. They are told by the French and by the Western and by the NATO whether to sit with the government or not. They are not doing enough. They did not condemn the atrocities. They did not condemn the bombing, the recent bombing in Damascus. If they don't want to. She just said that the UN is not doing enough. Why didn't they condemn the American role in not condemning the bombing in Damascus just recently? I mean, we don't see them legitimate. We don't see that they want to help in building Syria. If anything, they are destroying Syria. If they really want to help Syria, they should sit down with the Syrians. We don't need any foreign intervention. If Syria is going to change, it will change with its own people. We don't need any Westerners to help us. We don't need them. If anything, they are destroying Syria right now.
Aida Deleti, doesn't the Syrian National Council risk overplaying their hand here by taking this position?
Well, I think the Syrian National Council does have the Syrians' best interest in mind, and this is what we have to work with. I think they're articulate. I think they have an agenda, even though I think they need to be more clear to people like me. When I go to research what our charter is, I still don't know what they're planning to do with us. On the other hand, everybody's talking about intervention here and there. Well, first of all, I think outsourcing the president's protection to Iranian National Guards, I think is absolutely disgusting. I think the Scud missiles are Russian. The experts in Syria are Russian. I mean, I would like to see the Americans, of course, the beacon supposedly of democracy. I would like to see them come in and do something humanitarian, and I would like to see some more, proactive work. We cannot continue like this.
Well, the
real issue is, instead of looking back, is where are we going? Where are we going? What is the plan? There is a future. The king cannot continue, and even if he tried to, we all eventually have to put all these buildings back together. We have 4,000 schools have been destroyed. Some of them turned into prisons. Where are we going?
By whom?
Go ahead, Hanadi.
By whom? Who destroyed them? Yes, we have now, it's official that America declared that it's arming and funding these terrorists. There are US death squads there in Syria, and she knows that, I think. We know
would
that
love
Americans
to have this
are there. We know
conversation with you,
Israeli weapons have been found with these terrorists. I don't know where you're coming from. You are biased to your group. We have a lot of reporters. They're Westerners. They're not only Syrians. I don't go by what Syria says. I live in Australia. I need to know what's happening in Syria, so I don't get my information from Syria. I get my information from the global. Yes, you are not in Syria. You don't live in Syria either.
The Syrians.
You have no rights either. You don't live there. I read a lot of critical sources.
I have invested a lot in my country. Fantastic.
I've read Lizzie Phelan's report,
however,
Webster's report, Global Search reports.
This is not about us.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to interrupt. I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we are unfortunately out of time. But I want to thank all three of our guests for taking part in what's been a very lively debate. Afra Jalabi, Aida Deleti, and Hanadi Assoud. Thank you very much, all three of you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in Syria, not just on this program, but our on-the-hour news bulletins and online at aljazeera.com. I'm Hazem Seeker. Thanks for joining us. The latest news is up next.